Imagine a man who had everything: wealth, power, respect. But in a single night, he lost the only person who made his world complete. His mansion turned silent, his heart turned cold, and his newborn daughter became a painful reminder of the love he could never hold again. He was ready to give up on life, until one ordinary day, a stranger walked through his door. A young nanny with nothing but compassion would soon prove that sometimes the greatest miracles come from the most unexpected places. Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Richard Lawson stood in front of the bathroom mirror, his fingers trembling as he tried to adjust his navy blue tie. For years, he had been a man of precision, an attorney who knew how to impress judges, intimidate opponents, and command respect in any courtroom. His appearance had always been a shield: polished shoes, tailored suits, a clean shave. But now, 3 weeks after the most devastating day of his life, he couldn't even tie a simple knot without his hands shaking. The reflection staring back at him was not the Richard people in Manhattan knew. His dark hair, once carefully styled, was a disheveled mess. His face was pale and drawn, with a rough stubble covering his jawline. His once bright eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with sleepless nights. Every wrinkle seemed deeper, every line heavier. He looked less like a successful 38-year-old attorney and more like a man twice his age, worn down by grief he couldn't shake. And then came the sound, the fragile, piercing cry of a baby drifted from the nursery down the hall. His chest tightened instantly, as though invisible hands were crushing him from the inside. He closed his eyes, fighting against the wave of panic that rose whenever he heard that sound. His daughter, his newborn Lily, needed him. But instead of joy, her cry was a reminder of what he had lost: Hannah. The name alone was enough to make his throat close. Hannah, his wife, the woman who had brought light into every corner of his world, was gone. She had died the same night Lily was born. Complications, the doctors said, words that felt like meaningless daggers. Richard had been forced to walk out of the hospital with his daughter in his arms and his wife in a coffin. Since that night, he hadn't been able to look at Lily without guilt and anger twisting inside him. She was beautiful, yes, tiny fingers, soft skin, a small mouth that sometimes formed shapes that looked like a smile. But every feature reminded him of Hannah. The nursery, painted in soft yellow and white, had been Hannah's dream project. She had picked out everything herself: white wooden crib, pastel blankets, stuffed animals lining the shelves, even the rocking chair by the window. "Lily will bring light," she had told him, smiling as her hand rested on her growing belly. "She'll make this house brighter than ever." Now, standing in the doorway of that very room, Richard felt suffocated. The bright yellow walls mocked him. The crib, perfectly arranged, looked like a cruel stage for a play Hannah never got to perform. And Lily, his tiny daughter with Hannah's soft brown eyes, was lying inside, fists clenched, crying as though demanding something he could never give. He stood frozen, gripping the doorframe so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He wanted to go in, to scoop Lily up, to be the father Hannah had believed he could be. But his legs wouldn't move. The guilt chained him to the spot. "Richard," came a calm but firm voice behind him. He turned slightly to see Evelyn, his 60-year-old mother-in-law. Her grey hair was tied in a neat bun, her posture as composed as always. She wore the faint scent of lavender, the same fragrance Hannah used to spray on their bedsheets every night. Evelyn had come to live with them after Hannah's funeral, answering Richard's desperate midnight phone call when he admitted he didn't know how to take care of Lily alone. "She's hungry," Evelyn said softly, stepping past him toward the crib. "Or maybe she just wants to be held." "I can't," Richard whispered, his voice breaking. His throat felt raw, his chest heavy. Evelyn scooped Lily up with the ease of someone who had raised children before. The baby instantly calmed against her chest, her cries fading into soft whimpers. Watching that, Richard felt two emotions collide inside him: relief that Lily had stopped crying, and shame that it wasn't because of him. "You can't keep doing this," Evelyn said gently as she rocked Lily. "She's your daughter, Richard. She needs her father." Richard looked away, his jaw tightening. "She's the reason Hannah isn't here anymore." The words hung in the air like poison. Evelyn's eyes softened with pain, but her voice remained steady. "No, Richard. Hannah's death wasn't Lily's fault. It wasn't yours either. Sometimes life is cruel, and there's no one to blame." But Richard couldn't separate the two. Every time Lily looked at him with those wide, innocent eyes, he saw Hannah's face. It was like Hannah was haunting him through their daughter, both a gift and a wound he couldn't escape. "You need to eat," Evelyn continued, her tone firm but motherly. "And you need to shower before you face your office today." "This isn't how Hannah would want to see you," Richard exhaled shakily. It was his first day back at the law firm after taking time off, and the thought of returning felt unbearable. But staying in this apartment, surrounded by echoes of Hannah's laughter and the unrelenting cries of Lily, was suffocating him even more. "Can you stay with her?" Richard asked finally, his voice low, almost ashamed. "Just for today." "I will," Evelyn said, adjusting Lily in her arms, but then her eyes locked on his, steady and unwavering. "But Richard, you can't keep running from her. You can't keep running from being her father." Her words hit him like a gavel striking in court. Running, that's what he had been doing. Running from Lily, from his grief, from himself. He pressed his lips together, nodding faintly but saying nothing. Before leaving the room, he glanced at Lily once more. Her small face, now relaxed against Evelyn's shoulder, looked so fragile, so helpless. For a fleeting moment, Richard felt something stir deep in his chest. Not quite love, not quite hope, but a faint whisper of connection. But he quickly turned away, straightening his crooked tie and forcing himself toward the front door. He wasn't ready. He didn't know if he would ever be ready. The September air in Manhattan carried a damp chill as Richard Lawson stepped out of his apartment building and onto the busy street. The city had not paused for his grief. Taxis honked impatiently. People hurried to work with coffee cups in hand, and the hum of life continued as though nothing had happened. But for Richard, every sound felt distant, like he was trapped in a glass box, watching the world move on without him. He adjusted his tie again, though it still hung imperfectly, and hailed a cab. For years, Richard had been known at Lawson & Myers, the prestigious law firm where he worked, as a man of precision. Every detail mattered, from his crisp suits to his perfectly organized case files. But now he felt like a shadow of that man. The cab ride downtown was silent, except for the rattling of the meter and the occasional cough of the driver. Richard stared out the window, his mind miles away. He thought of Lily, lying in the crib with her fists clenched, crying for someone who wasn't there. Evelyn could comfort her, yes, but Richard couldn't shake the image of his daughter searching with her tiny hands for a mother she would never know. A pang of guilt stabbed him again. He should have been there, holding her, singing to her, the way Hannah would have. But the very idea terrified him. What if he failed? What if she grew up resenting him the way he resented himself? The cab pulled up in front of the towering office building where Lawson & Myers occupied 3 entire floors. Richard paid the driver and stepped onto the marble steps, his stomach tightening. He hadn't been here in weeks, not since Hannah's funeral. The thought of facing his colleagues made him feel exposed, as though they would all see his weakness, his guilt, his brokenness. Inside, the familiar smell of polished wood and expensive cologne greeted him. The receptionist, a young woman named Melissa, gave him a sympathetic smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Lawson," she said softly. Richard forced a nod, walking past without meeting her eyes. He could feel the weight of stares from associates and secretaries. Some whispered condolences as he passed. Others looked away awkwardly, not knowing what to say. His reputation as a sharp, unshakable attorney seemed laughable now. Before he could reach his office, a voice called out, "Richard!" It was Charles Myers, one of the founding partners, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a commanding presence. He gestured toward his office, a space filled with leather chairs and shelves of legal tomes. Richard entered, feeling the gravity of the moment. "Sit down," Myers said kindly, removing his glasses. "How are you holding up?" Richard sat in the leather chair across the massive mahogany desk, tugging nervously at his tie. "I'm fine." "Ready to work." "Fine?" Myers repeated, his brow furrowing. "Richard, you lost your wife 3 weeks ago. You have a newborn at home. Nobody expects you to be fine." Richard's jaw tightened. "Work keeps me focused. Hannah would have wanted me to keep moving forward." Myers studied him carefully. "Work can be an anchor, yes, but don't let it be an escape. Your daughter needs you." The word struck Richard like a slap. He wasn't used to hearing personal advice from his boss, especially about Lily. "Evelyn is with her," he replied quickly. "She's fine. Babies need their fathers too," Myers said gently. "I know, because I wasn't there for mine. I buried myself in this firm while my kids grew up without me. And now, decades later, I can't get that time back." Richard swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten. He wanted to argue, to say that his situation was different, but the truth hit too close. He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm here to work, Charles. Please, just give me cases, give me contracts, whatever you need reviewed." Myers sighed, slipping his glasses back on. "Very well. No major trials for now. Start with contract revisions." "He's back in." Richard nodded gratefully. He needed something, anything, to drown out the noise in his head. By mid-morning, his desk was piled with documents. For a while, the rhythm of legal language gave him relief. Clauses, terms, and fine print. It was mechanical, structured, controllable. Unlike life, unlike grief, unlike Lily's cries that echoed in his mind. But at 11:15, his phone rang. The screen flashed Evelyn. His chest tightened as he answered. "Yes?" Her voice was tense. "Richard, Lily's been crying for almost 2 hours. I tried everything, feeding, changing, rocking her. She won't stop." I think something might be wrong. Panic surged through him, mingled with frustration. "You said you could handle it," he snapped, harsher than intended. "I am handling it," Evelyn said firmly, but he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "But she needs you. Sometimes babies cry for their parents." Richard clenched his jaw. "She's too young to even know who I am." "Richard," Evelyn said softly, "she knows. Trust me." He ended the call quickly, gripping the phone so hard his hand shook. His colleagues outside his office probably noticed the storm on his face, but he didn't care. He stared down at the papers on his desk, the letters blurring. For the first time in years, he couldn't focus. 15 minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Another call from Evelyn. He ignored it, pressing the red button. He couldn't go home, not yet. He couldn't face Lily, not in this state. At lunch, instead of returning home as he once did when Hannah was alive, Richard wandered into a cafe across the street. He ordered a sandwich but barely touched it, staring out the window. Families walked by, mothers pushing strollers, fathers holding little hands, couples laughing as they crossed the street. Every sight felt like a knife. He was supposed to have that life too. Hannah by his side, Lily in her arms, a family, but now it was gone. When he returned to the office, his phone showed 3 missed calls and 2 texts from Evelyn. She finally calmed down. "Sorry to bother you." And then another. "We need to talk tonight." Richard shoved the phone in his pocket, guilt gnawing at him. By 6 o'clock he left the office and drove home, the sky over Manhattan fading to twilight. When he opened the apartment door, the smell of soup greeted him. Evelyn was in the kitchen, stirring a pot. Lily was asleep in her bassinet nearby, her tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths. "How was work?" Evelyn asked without looking at him. "Fine, productive," Richard muttered, loosening his tie. He glanced at Lily, so small, so fragile. She looked peaceful, and for once he felt relief wash over him. "She cried for hours today," Evelyn said, turning to face him. "She needed you." "I can't just drop everything at the office whenever she fusses," Richard argued, defensiveness creeping into his tone. Evelyn's expression hardened. "This isn't just fussing, Richard. This is your daughter. She isn't a distraction from your life. She is your life now." Her words slammed into him harder than any courtroom argument. He sat at the table, staring at his untouched bowl of soup, feeling stripped bare. Evelyn reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I know you're hurting. I know you miss Hannah. But Lily is not the enemy. She's the last gift Hannah left you. Don't push her away because you're afraid to lose her too." Richard's eyes burned, but he blinked the tears away. He wanted to believe Evelyn, but the fear was still there, heavy and relentless. He ate in silence, listening to the faint sounds of Lily breathing in the corner. That night, long after Evelyn went to bed, Richard wandered into the nursery. He stood over the crib, staring down at his daughter. Lily's tiny fists were curled near her face. Her lips pursed as she slept. "Your mother would have known what to do," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't." His hand hovered above her, trembling, before finally brushing the soft blanket near her cheek. Lily stirred, her face scrunching for a moment before settling again. Richard's heart clenched. "I don't know if I can be enough," he whispered, barely audible. "But I'll try." For the first time, he didn't flee the room. He stayed there, sitting in the rocking chair Hannah had chosen, watching Lily breathe. And though his grief was still sharp, something new flickered in his chest, a fragile, almost imperceptible spark of responsibility. The following morning dawned grey, with rain streaking the wide glass windows of Richard Lawson's apartment. The steady tapping of droplets against the glass should have been soothing, but for Richard it was only another reminder of the emptiness echoing through the rooms. He had barely slept. Every time he drifted off, he woke with a start, thinking he heard Lily crying, though often it was only silence. When he finally rose, his body felt leaden. Evelyn was already awake, moving about the kitchen with quiet efficiency. The smell of brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of baby powder drifting from the nursery. "You're up early," Evelyn said, without turning from the stove. Richard rubbed his face, trying to scrub away exhaustion. "Did she wake during the night?" "Twice. I fed her, changed her. She's back asleep now." Her words landed heavily. He should have been the one to wake, the one to care for Lily in the stillness of night. Instead, he had left it all to Evelyn, retreating into his grief like a coward. He poured himself a cup of coffee, his hands shaking slightly as he lifted it. "You need to learn, Richard," Evelyn said gently, as though reading his mind. "Babies need more than food and clean diapers. They need presence, comfort, security." "I'm trying," Richard muttered, though the defensiveness in his voice betrayed his guilt. "Are you?" Evelyn asked softly, finally turning to look at him. Her eyes were tired but steady. "Or are you trying to avoid her?" Before Richard could respond, a thin cry rose from the nursery, fragile but insistent. He froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, waiting. This was his moment. Slowly, with the weight of dread pressing against his chest, Richard set down the cup and walked toward the nursery. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, each one heavier than the last. When he reached the doorway, his breath caught. Lily was awake, squirming in her crib, her little fists flailing as her cries grew louder. Her face was red, her eyes squeezed shut, her tiny mouth opening wide in distress. Richard gripped the doorframe, every muscle tense. What if I drop her? What if I hurt her? What if she knows I blame her for Hannah? Behind him, Evelyn's voice carried calmly. "Go to her," Richard's heart hammered. His hands shook as he reached into the crib. The moment his arms lifted Lily, her cries grew sharper as though sensing his fear. Panic surged through him. He almost placed her back down, ready to admit defeat. But Evelyn's voice stopped him. "Don't put her down. Babies feel your energy. She's crying because she feels your fear. Breathe, Richard. Let her know she's safe." Richard inhaled shakily, then exhaled, forcing his shoulders to relax. He held Lily closer, awkwardly rocking her. She squirmed, whimpering, but the piercing cries softened to sharp little hiccups. "Talk to her," Evelyn encouraged. Richard swallowed. His voice cracked. "Hi, Lily, it's Dad." The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. But as he spoke, Lily's eyes blinked open. She looked at him, not past him, not through him, but directly at him. Her eyes, those soft brown eyes so much like Hannah's, seemed to study his face. Something inside him shifted. He remembered the way Hannah used to sing at night, her voice low and sweet, her hand rubbing her swollen belly. Richard had always teased her about the lullaby she chose, a strange old tune her grandmother had sung to her. But Hannah swore the baby kicked more when she sang. Without thinking, Richard began to hum it. His voice was rough, uneven, but the melody filled the room. Lily's gaze didn't waver. Her breathing slowed, her fists unclenched. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile ghosted across her lips. Richard's throat tightened. Tears burned his eyes. For the first time since Hannah's death, he felt something other than pain when looking at Lily. He felt recognition, connection. Evelyn, watching from the doorway, smiled faintly. "You see? She knows your voice. She's been waiting for you." Richard couldn't answer. His voice was trapped behind the lump in his throat. He rocked Lily gently, humming the lullaby again and again, until her eyelids fluttered shut. When she finally drifted back to sleep, he laid her carefully in the crib, his movements cautious but steady. He lingered there, watching her tiny chest rise and fall. "She's so small," he whispered almost to himself. "So fragile. All babies are," Evelyn said softly. "But they grow stronger every day. And so will you, Richard. If you let yourself," he turned, wiping his eyes quickly, embarrassed. "I don't know if I can do this." "Not without Hannah. You don't have to be Hannah," Evelyn replied gently. "You just have to be Lily's father." The words stayed with him all morning, even as he dressed for work and left the apartment. At the office, Richard tried to bury himself in contracts again. The steady hum of printers, the shuffle of papers, the low murmur of colleagues, these had once been the sounds of his comfort zone, but now they only made him restless. He kept glancing at his phone, half dreading, half hoping Evelyn would call. At noon, the phone rang. His stomach flipped when he saw her name. "She's fine," Evelyn said quickly, sensing his panic. She just smiled. A real smile. Not gas, an actual smile. "You should have seen it." Richard pressed his hand to his forehead, his chest tightening. He wanted to be happy, but instead, sorrow stabbed him. He had missed it. "You'll see it soon enough," Evelyn assured him gently. "There will be more." But Richard couldn't shake the image of Hannah, radiant with joy, imagining herself rocking their baby, waiting for this very moment. And he hadn't been there. When the call ended, Richard sat back, staring blankly at the contracts. His grief was still there, sharp and heavy. But something else had been planted too. An ache not just for Hannah, but for the moments with Lily he was letting slip away. That evening, when he returned home, Evelyn handed Lily to him without hesitation. "She needs you," she said simply. This time Richard didn't argue. He took Lily into his arms, and though she fussed for a moment, she quieted as he began to hum that lullaby once more. For the first time, Richard didn't feel like he was running. He felt like he was beginning to stay. The rain had stopped by the time morning light spilled through the tall windows of Richard Lawson's apartment. But the world inside felt just as heavy as the storm outside had the night before. Richard sat at the dining table, untouched toast cooling on his plate, staring at nothing. The silence of the apartment was broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards and the distant hum of traffic from Fifth Avenue. Then it came, the familiar sound that had both haunted and softened him these past weeks. A faint whimper, followed by a cry rising steadily from the nursery. Richard's body stiffened. The instinct to wait for Evelyn to step in tugged at him, but something inside pushed him to rise. He couldn't keep hiding. He walked down the hallway, every step echoing against the walls, painted pale yellow by Hannah's choice. The nursery door was ajar, and Lily's cries spilled out. She lay in the crib, her little fists waving, her tiny face red with effort. Richard's throat tightened, but this time he didn't freeze. He stepped inside, leaning over the crib. "Hey, Princess," he whispered, his voice shaky. "It's Dad." The words felt more natural than before, though his heart still pounded. He reached down, lifting her carefully. She was lighter than he remembered, fragile, almost breakable. For a moment, panic surged. What if she slipped? What if he couldn't calm her? But as Lily nestled against his chest, her cries softened into whimpers. Richard held her close, rocking gently. "It's okay. I'm here." From the doorway, Evelyn watched quietly, her lips curving into the faintest smile. She didn't intervene. She didn't need to. Richard carried Lily to the rocking chair Hannah had chosen, sinking into the soft cushion. He remembered Hannah sitting there months before, her hand resting on her belly, humming the same lullaby he had tried the night before. The memory almost broke him, but instead of pulling away, he leaned into it. He began to hum again. His voice was rough but steady. Lily's eyes fluttered open, wide and curious, gazing up at him. Her tiny hand brushed against his shirt, gripping the fabric as though anchoring herself to him. For the first time, Richard felt something shift deep inside. The guilt was still there, yes, but layered with something warmer, responsibility, connection, maybe even the beginning of love. You know, he murmured, almost as though speaking to Hannah. She looks just like you. The same eyes, the same smile waiting to come out. His voice cracked, and he pressed his lips against Lily's soft hair. But I think she's got my stubbornness. God help us both, Lily gurgled faintly, the sound almost like a laugh. Richard felt his chest tighten, but this time not from grief, from wonder. Later that day, Richard dressed for work. He straightened his tie, still imperfect but better than before, and gathered his case files. Evelyn handed Lily back to him before he could leave. "Hold her for a minute," she said firmly. Richard hesitated, then accepted his daughter. Lily squirmed but didn't cry, her eyes studying his face as though memorizing him. Evelyn watched them both, her gaze sharp. "You can't keep burying yourself in the office, Richard. She needs you at home, too." "I'm trying," Richard muttered. "You're doing better," Evelyn admitted. "But trying isn't enough. She's already learning who her father is. Don't teach her that you're only here when it's convenient." Richard looked down at Lily, whose small mouth was opening and closing, as though she were trying to form words. He kissed her forehead gently. "I'll be back tonight," he whispered, more to himself than to Evelyn. At the office, the day unfolded in a blur of contracts, client calls, and hushed conversations. Richard had always thrived in the firm's relentless pace, but now every ringing phone reminded him of Evelyn's earlier call. Every clock tick reminded him of Lily's cries. He couldn't concentrate fully. Around midday, his phone buzzed again. It was Evelyn. "She's fine," she reassured quickly. "I just thought you'd want to know." She smiled again today. This time it was unmistakable. "You should have seen it, Richard." His throat tightened. He muttered a quiet thank you before hanging up, but the ache gnawed at him. He was missing everything, her first real smiles, the first signs of her little personality. Hannah would never forgive him for that. By the time evening came, Richard rushed home earlier than usual. When he opened the door, he froze. On the living room rug, Evelyn sat with Lily propped against a pillow, and across from them was a young woman Richard didn't recognize. She was in her mid-20s, with chestnut hair tied back and kind, steady eyes. She wore jeans and a simple cardigan, a large tote bag beside her. She was holding a colorful toy above Lily, who stared at it with wide-eyed fascination. "Richard," Evelyn said from the floor, standing slowly, "this is Emily Turner. She's a childcare specialist. I asked her to come by." Richard's brow furrowed. "A babysitter?" "Not just a babysitter," Emily said with a calm smile. "I specialize in newborn care. Families call me when they're overwhelmed." Richard stiffened. "I didn't agree to this." Evelyn's voice was firm. "You need help, Richard. I can't stay here forever." "Emily's here for an interview." Emily met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not here to replace anyone, Mr. Lawson, just to support you and Lily." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but then Lily let out a delighted coo, reaching her tiny hand toward the toy Emily held. The sight stopped him cold. His daughter, who had spent so much time crying, was calm, content, even curious. Something twisted inside him. Relief, jealousy, fear. "I don't know if I'm ready for strangers in my home," Richard said finally. His voice clipped. "Then let me earn your trust," Emily replied gently. "Not as a stranger. As someone who wants what's best for Lily." Richard looked at Evelyn, who stood with her arms folded, waiting. Then he looked at Lily, her eyes bright as she reached again for the toy. For the first time, Richard realized he wasn't just battling grief. He was standing at a crossroads. Either cling to his fear and keep running, or open the door to help, to possibility, to something new. and he didn't know which path terrified him more. The following days unfolded like a delicate balancing act, and for Richard Lawson, each moment seemed to pull him deeper into a world he was still unsure he could handle. Emily Turner began arriving at the apartment promptly at 7 every morning. She carried with her an air of calm professionalism, yet there was a gentleness in her manner that immediately softened the tension in the room. Evelyn, clearly relieved to have help, wasted no time showing Emily the nursery, the kitchen, the carefully labelled shelves where bottles and formula were kept. Richard, on the other hand, stood back with his arms crossed, watching everything like a hawk. He didn't trust easily, and the thought of a stranger handling his daughter filled him with unease. Yet despite himself, he couldn't deny the ease with which Emily held Lily. How naturally she supported the infant's fragile head. How effortlessly she soothed her cries with a soft voice and a rhythmic sway. One morning, as Richard adjusted his crooked tie before leaving for work, he overheard something that stopped him cold. From the nursery came a soft melody, not the old lullaby Hannah had sung, but something different, sweet and unfamiliar. He lingered in the hallway, listening. Emily was humming as she rocked Lily, her voice low and steady. Lily wasn't crying. She wasn't even fussing. She was gazing up at Emily with wide, curious eyes, her tiny fists waving in contentment. Richard's jaw tightened. A strange jealousy stirred in him. That was supposed to be his role, wasn't it? Hannah had always pictured him as the one singing, the one calming their baby. And yet, here was Emily, stepping into the space he had been too afraid to fill. "You're leaving later than usual," Evelyn's voice came from behind him, startling him. Richard turned abruptly. He didn't finish the sentence. He couldn't admit he had been listening. "I'm heading out now," but as he rode the elevator down to the lobby, Emily's humming lingered in his mind. At the law firm, Richard tried burying himself in work again. He reviewed contracts, fielded phone calls, and even argued a minor corporate case in court, his old confidence flickering back in brief bursts. But in the quiet moments, between meetings, during lunch breaks, in the back of a cab, his thoughts drifted back to Lily. What was she doing? Was she crying? Was Emily holding her now, rocking her in that chair where Hannah once sat? Was Lily starting to see Emily as the safe, familiar presence Richard couldn't yet be? By the third day, Richard couldn't resist calling home from the office. Evelyn answered. "She's fine," Evelyn said, her voice calm. "Emily just put her down for a nap." "She's been sleeping well today," Richard hesitated. "And she's okay with Emily?" There was a pause. "Richard," Evelyn said slowly, "babies sense warmth. They know when someone cares for them. Lily feels safe with Emily. That's not something to resent. It's something to be grateful for." Richard hung up without responding. Gratitude was the last thing he felt. That evening, when he returned home earlier than usual, he found Emily sitting cross-legged on the rug, Lily lying on her back before her. Emily dangled a bright toy above Lily's face, encouraging her to follow it with her eyes. Lily gurgled, kicking her tiny legs in excitement. Richard froze in the doorway. The scene was intimate, tender, like a snapshot of a family moment that didn't belong to him. Emily glanced up, smiling. "She's getting stronger. Look how well she tracks the toy now." Richard cleared his throat. "I'll take her." Emily hesitated only briefly before gently lifting Lily into his arms. For a moment, Richard felt the old panic rise. What if she started crying? But Lily didn't cry. She nestled against his chest, fussing only a little before settling. "She knows you," Emily said softly. "Even when she's upset, your heartbeat calms her. Don't underestimate that." Richard looked down at his daughter, her small face pressed against his shirt. Something shifted inside him, fragile but real. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe Lily did know him, even if he didn't fully know himself yet. Later that night, after Evelyn had gone to bed, Richard lingered in the living room with Lily asleep in his arms. The city lights flickered through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. He found himself speaking aloud, his voice hushed. "You scare me," he whispered to his daughter. "Not because of who you are, but because of what you remind me of. Every time I see you, I see your mother. And I'm terrified I'll fail you the way I failed her." Lily stirred but didn't wake. Richard's throat tightened. "But today, when you looked at me, I felt something. Like maybe you don't care about my failures. Maybe you just want me here." The words hung in the air, fragile and raw. The next morning, Emily arrived to find Richard already awake, pacing the living room with Lily in his arms. "You're up early," she remarked, setting her bag down. She wouldn't go back to sleep, Richard said, his tone sharp, but his eyes softer than usual. "I tried the lullaby. It worked yesterday, but not today." Emily smiled gently. "Babies like variety. Sometimes what works one night won't work the next." "May I?" Reluctantly, Richard handed Lily over. Emily cradled her easily, humming a different tune. Within minutes, Lily's cries softened into quiet hiccups. Richard clenched his jaw. "You make it look easy." "It isn't easy," Emily replied, her voice calm but firm. "It's patience. It's showing up, even when you're tired, even when you feel like you can't do it anymore. That's parenting." Her words cut deep. Because Richard knew she was right. And for the first time, instead of resisting, he let the truth settle inside him. That evening, after Emily left, Richard found himself back in the nursery. Lily was lying in her crib, eyes wide, making soft cooing sounds. He sat in the rocking chair watching her. "You're changing me, you know," he whispered. "I don't know how, but you are. And maybe that's not such a bad thing." For the first time, as he sat there in the quiet glow of the nightlight, Richard didn't feel like he was drowning. He felt like he was learning to breathe again. The crisp air of early October drifted through a crack in the nursery window, carrying with it the faint scent of rain-soaked pavement and city leaves beginning to turn. Richard Lawson sat on the floor beside the crib, Lily propped carefully against a pillow on the colourful playmat Hannah had ordered months before. She was more alert now, almost 2 months old, her tiny hands grasping at the dangling shapes above her. Richard watched in quiet awe, his lawyer's mind struggling to reconcile how something so small could command so much of his world. Evelyn entered the room with folded laundry, setting it neatly on the dresser. She paused, watching the scene. Richard hadn't noticed her yet. He leaned in, his voice soft, but filled with something new, curiosity rather than fear. "Come on, Lily, you can do it." "Reach for the star," Lily gurgled, stretching her fist toward the plush yellow star suspended from the mobile. She didn't catch it, but she tried again, her determination clear even in her infant movements. Richard chuckled, a sound Evelyn hadn't heard in weeks. "You've got her stubborn streak," he whispered. "That's your mom in you." Evelyn's eyes softened. Quietly, she backed out of the room, leaving father and daughter alone. That evening at dinner, Evelyn finally spoke of something she had been holding back. "Richard," she began, spooning soup into bowls, "I'll be going home at the end of this week." The words made Richard freeze, his spoon hovering midair. "What do you mean?" "I've been here over a month. My own life is waiting, my home, my volunteer work, my friends. You've come a long way. It's time for you and Lily to stand on your own." Richard's pulse quickened. He looked at his daughter, sleeping nearby in her bassinet, then back at Evelyn. Panic bubbled up. "I'm not ready." "What if something happens? What if I can't handle her?" Evelyn reached across the table, placing her wrinkled hand over his. "You've already handled more than you realize. I've watched you. The way you calm her now, the way she looks at you, it's different. She knows you, Richard. She trusts you." Richard's eyes burned, but he shook his head. "You make it sound so easy." "It isn't," Evelyn said firmly. "It never will be. But love doesn't come from perfection. It comes from presence. Hannah wanted you to be here for Lily. That's enough." Her words lingered in Richard's mind long after dinner ended. The next morning, Emily arrived as usual, her bag slung over her shoulder, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. She greeted Richard with a smile, though she noticed the shadows under his eyes. "Rough night?" she asked. "Evelyn told me she's leaving this week," Richard muttered, rubbing his temples. "I don't know if I can do this without her." Emily studied him quietly, then said, "That's because you still think you're doing this alone." Richard frowned. "Aren't I?" Emily shook her head. "You're not alone. You have me for the day hours. You have friends. You even have colleagues who would help if you let them. But more importantly, you have Lily. She's not a burden, Richard. She's your partner in this. You'll learn each other day by day." Her words struck him harder than expected. He looked over at Lily, lying in Emily's arms, staring up with wide eyes. Partner. The word felt foreign, yet strangely comforting. That afternoon, Richard returned from the office earlier than usual. He found Emily sitting cross-legged on the rug again, Lily in front of her, babbling softly. Emily was laughing, clapping her hands in response to Lily's coos, making silly faces. The apartment was filled with a sound Richard hadn't heard in months, laughter that wasn't strained, but genuine. For a moment, Richard just stood in the doorway watching. The sight warmed him and unsettled him all at once. He was grateful Lily was happy, yet a pang of jealousy lingered. Emily looked up, catching his gaze. "You're home early?" "I thought I'd help with her bath tonight," Richard said awkwardly. Emily's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but softened into a smile. "That's wonderful. Let me set everything up." The bath was an event in itself. Richard knelt by the small tub, sleeves rolled up, nerves jangling, as Emily handed him his daughter. Lily squirmed, making tiny protesting noises, but Richard held her firmly, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's got you." As the warm water touched her skin, Lily's fussing calmed. Richard carefully cupped water in his hand, pouring it gently over her tiny belly. She kicked her feet, splashing, and Richard laughed despite himself. "She likes it," Emily said softly from beside him, handing him a washcloth. "See how relaxed she is?" Richard nodded, his throat tight. He looked at Lily's small face, her lips parting as though forming her first giggles. The memory of Hannah surged in his mind, her excitement when she talked about swim lessons, beach trips, summer vacations they would never have. For the first time, instead of crippling pain, the memory carried a bittersweet warmth. After the bath, Richard wrapped Lily in a soft towel, cradling her close. Her body was warm, her head resting against his chest. He kissed her damp hair, whispering, "I think you're braver than me, kiddo." That night, after Emily had left and Evelyn had gone to bed, Richard sat alone in the living room with Lily in his arms. The city glowed outside the window, but the apartment felt different, less like a mausoleum, more like a home. He spoke softly, not sure if he was talking to Lily or Hannah or both. "I'm still scared. I don't know what I'm doing, but today, for the first time, I didn't feel like I was failing. I felt like, maybe I can do this. Maybe we can do this," Lily stirred, her small hand clutching the fabric of his shirt. Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her tiny body against his chest. For the first time, he let the silence settle not as emptiness, but as peace, and though grief still sat heavy in his heart, something new was growing alongside it, something fragile, steady, undeniable, hope. The day Evelyn left dawned with a pale golden light over Manhattan, the kind of morning Hannah used to love. Richard stood at the window, Lily balanced awkwardly against his shoulder, watching the city below come alive with taxis, honking horns, and the rush of commuters. For the first time since Hannah's death, Richard wasn't watching the city with detachment. Instead, he was watching with unease, because today, the safety net of Evelyn's presence would vanish. Evelyn moved through the apartment with quiet precision, her suitcase already by the door. She had been there for weeks, holding the household together, filling the silence with calm words and steady hands. Now she wore the air of someone preparing for a long-delayed return to her own life. Over breakfast, the mood was heavy. Richard barely touched his coffee, his gaze darting between his daughter and his mother-in-law. Lily cooed in her bassinet, oblivious to the weight pressing on her father's chest. "You don't have to go," Richard blurted suddenly. Evelyn smiled faintly, shaking her head. "I do, Richard. You've leaned on me long enough. You need to stand on your own 2 feet now." His jaw tightened. "What if I can't?" "You will," Evelyn replied firmly. "I've watched you grow into this role, even if you can't see it yet. Lily trusts you. That's all that matters." Her words echoed Hannah's voice in his memory. "She'll need you, Richard. Promise me you'll be there." Richard swallowed hard, unable to speak. Before she left, Evelyn hugged him tightly, whispering, "You're not losing me. I'm a phone call away. But you are strong enough to do this without me." Then she pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead, tears welling in her eyes. Take care of each other, and then she was gone. The apartment felt cavernous without Evelyn. The silence pressed in, heavier than ever. Richard stared at the closed door for a long moment before turning back to Lily. She stared up at him from her bassinet, her wide eyes blinking with innocent trust. "Well," Richard muttered, rubbing the back of his neck, "it's just us now." The day tested him immediately. Lily cried mid-morning, and Richard panicked. He tried a bottle, but she refused it. He checked her diaper, but that wasn't it either. Frustrated, he paced the apartment, rocking her clumsily in his arms. "What do you want, kid? Just tell me what you want." But then he remembered what Emily had said. Babies feel your energy. He stopped pacing, took a deep breath, and sat in the rocking chair. Slowly, he began humming the lullaby Hannah had loved. Lily quieted, her cries softening to whimpers, then sighs. Her tiny hand clutched his shirt, and Richard felt her breathing steady against him. Relief washed over him like cool water. He had done it. He had calmed her on his own. By afternoon, the challenges multiplied. Lily needed a bath, and for the first time, Richard faced it alone. He set everything up carefully. Warm water, towel, washcloth, fresh onesie, just as Emily had shown him. But the moment he lowered Lily into the tub, she began wailing. Richard's hands shook. "It's okay, sweetheart, Daddy's got you," he whispered, his voice cracking. He nearly pulled her out in panic, but then he forced himself to remember Emily's calm instructions. "Keep your movements steady. Keep your voice soft," he tried again. This time, instead of rushing, he poured the warm water slowly over her belly, humming to her. Lily's cries faltered, then stopped. Her big brown eyes stared up at him, calm now, her mouth forming a tiny O, as if surprised at her own change of mood. Richard laughed, an unsteady, almost disbelieving sound. "You're tougher than me, aren't you?" Afterward, wrapped in a towel, Lily smelled of baby soap and warmth. Richard pressed his lips to her damp hair, his chest swelling with something fierce and protective. For the first time, he realized he wasn't terrified of breaking her. He was terrified of the world ever hurting her. That evening, Emily stopped by to check on them. Richard, exhausted but oddly proud, recounted his small victories, calming Lily, bathing her alone. Emily listened intently, her smile encouraging. "You see," she said gently, "you're doing it. You don't need anyone else to prove you're her father. You're showing her every day." Richard's eyes burned. He didn't answer right away, only looked down at Lily, who was drifting to sleep in his arms. He thought of Hannah again, how she had trusted him with their daughter's future. For the first time, he felt he wasn't betraying that trust. Later that night, long after Emily had left, Richard stood by the nursery window with Lily nestled against his shoulder. The city glowed below, 1,000 lights scattered across the skyline. He spoke softly, not knowing if he was speaking to Hannah, to Lily, or to himself. "I thought I'd never be enough without you, Hannah. But she doesn't need me to be perfect. She just needs me to be here." He kissed Lily's soft head, tears sliding down his cheeks. "And I promise I'll always be here." The words settled into the room like a vow, quiet but unshakable. In the silence that followed, Richard felt something shift deep inside him. For months, he had been drowning in grief, unable to move forward. But now, holding his daughter close, he realized he wasn't drowning anymore. He was learning to swim with her, and though Hannah was gone, her presence lived on in every smile, every coo, every heartbeat of the tiny girl in his arms. By the middle of autumn, New York glowed in amber light. The sky shifted from deep blue to golden as the sun fell, and the sidewalks were scattered with red and orange maple leaves. Amidst the endless rush of the city, in a quiet apartment, a fragile but powerful transformation was taking place. Richard Lawson was no longer the broken man he had been weeks before. Standing in the nursery, he paced the floor with Lily nestled against his chest. His voice was shaky, but steady enough to hum a lullaby, the same one Hannah used to sing. The notes were off-key, but the melody carried love, and Lily responded in the most unexpected way. For the first time she smiled. That small, innocent smile pierced through Richard's grief. His eyes filled with tears, but they were no longer only tears of sorrow. They carried pride, relief, and the first flickers of hope. Emily had become a steady presence. Since Evelyn had left, she visited often, helping in ways Richard hadn't realized he needed. One evening, Richard returned home earlier than usual. He paused at the door, frozen by what he saw. Emily was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, with Lily lying on a soft blanket in front of her. Emily made silly faces, her voice warm and animated, and Lily burst into little giggles that echoed through the apartment. Richard's heart clenched. This was the first time laughter had truly returned to the home since Hannah's passing. He leaned quietly against the doorway, unable to look away. Emily noticed him and gave a small smile. "She'll laugh for you too. You just have to give her the chance." Richard swallowed, walked forward and bent to pick Lily up. He expected her to cry, but instead she clutched the button of his shirt with her tiny fingers. Richard whispered hoarsely, "You really do know me now, don't you?" Emily stood silently, watching with gentle pride, as though she was witnessing a man discover a part of himself he thought was lost. Weeks passed, and then came a moment Richard never thought he would experience. Lily, now almost 3 months old, lifted her little hands toward him one afternoon and said in a soft, broken sound, "Da." Richard froze, then scooped her up, spinning around the room, tears spilling freely. "She called me. She knows I'm her father." Emily's eyes shone. "Yes, you are her whole world." That night Richard didn't sleep. Instead, he sat by the window with Lily asleep in his arms, the city lights shimmering in the distance. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Hannah, I kept my promise. I didn't run away. I'm still here, for her and for you." Emily's place in his life was shifting too. One late evening after Lily was asleep, Richard and Emily sat quietly in the living room. The glow of a single lamp softened the room. Richard spoke softly, almost to himself. "I thought I'd never smile again. But you and this little girl, you've taught me how to breathe again." Emily's eyes softened. "You're not alone, Richard. Lily is saving you. And you're saving her." The words lingered in the air, weaving an invisible thread of understanding between them. Not romance, not yet, but something deeper than friendship, trust, empathy, and the beginning of healing. Winter crept in, and snow began to cover the city. Every morning Richard brewed coffee and stood by the frosted window with Lily in his arms, watching the flakes fall. Emily often joined them, and together they shared small moments that carried the weight of entire lifetimes. One morning, Lily's laughter rang out brighter than ever before. Richard looked at her, and for the first time, he realized the apartment wasn't a mausoleum anymore. It was alive again, filled with love, hope, and the fragile beginnings of a future. Holding Lily close, Richard whispered, "You are my light, my Lily. You broke through my darkness. And every day, you teach me what it means to love." For the first time in months, he no longer felt like a man haunted by grief. He felt like a father, standing at the doorway of a new life, ready to step forward. The first snowstorm of winter swept across New York like a blanket of silence. The city that never slept seemed to pause, softened under the weight of white. Inside Richard Lawson's apartment, however, there was no silence. There was life, warm, fragile, and loud. Lily, now nearing 4 months old, had discovered her voice. The nursery echoed with her coos, squeals, and sudden bursts of laughter. Every sound was a revelation to Richard, who still caught himself marveling at the fact that he could recognize the difference between her hungry cry, her tired whimper, and her gleeful chatter. Richard's mornings had changed completely. Once his routine was a rushed tie adjustment, black coffee, and a sprint to the subway. Now it began with Lily's giggles and the sweet chaos of preparing her bottle. He found himself humming Hannah's lullabies as he measured the formula, sometimes adding his own nonsense verses just to make Lily laugh. and every laugh was a small victory, a reminder that his daughter didn't just need him, she wanted him. Emily's presence had become woven into the fabric of their days. She was no longer just a caregiver. She was part of the rhythm of their lives. She'd arrive each morning with her calm, steady smile, and Richard would often find himself grateful in ways words couldn't capture. One snowy afternoon, while Lily napped, Richard and Emily sat in the living room with mugs of cocoa. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. For the first time, Richard felt the weight of grief shift slightly, not gone, but no longer crushing him into the ground. "Do you know what terrifies me the most?" Richard asked suddenly, staring into the flames. Emily looked at him quietly. "What?" "That one day I'll forget Hannah's laugh, or the way she used to sing off-key when she thought no one was listening. That Lily will grow up and never know her mother beyond photographs and stories." Emily placed her mug down and leaned forward. "Then keep telling the stories, Richard. Sing her the same songs. Bring Hannah into the room every day through memory, so Lily grows up knowing that love never dies, it only changes form." Her words lodged deep in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he needed someone to say that. Weeks later came a day Richard would never forget. Lily had been especially restless, crying through much of the morning. Richard tried everything, feeding, rocking, singing. Nothing worked. Frustrated but determined, he held her close and whispered, "What do you want, sweetheart? Tell me." And then it happened. Her tiny lips formed the syllable clearly, "Papa." Richard froze, stunned. His heart hammered, as though the world itself had stopped. "Say it again," he whispered. "Papa." He broke down, tears spilling as he kissed her forehead again and again. Emily, standing quietly in the doorway, captured the moment on her phone, but didn't intrude. This was father and daughter, finding each other completely at last. That evening, Richard sat by the window, Lily asleep against his chest. The city glittered below, and for the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He belonged to this child, to this new chapter, to life again, but healing wasn't without its challenges. A month later, Richard decided to visit Hannah's grave for the first time since the funeral. The idea alone filled him with dread, but he knew it was time. He dressed Lily warmly in a tiny pink snowsuit, buckled her into the car seat, and drove through the slushy streets. The cemetery was quiet, blanketed in white. Richard carried Lily in his arms as he walked slowly toward the simple headstone. His breath came out in shaky clouds. "Hi, love," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I brought someone who's been waiting to meet you properly." He lowered himself onto the cold ground. Lily nestled in his lap. The baby blinked at the snowflakes swirling in the air, cooing softly. Richard stroked the stone, his hand trembling. "She's perfect, Hannah. She has your eyes, your stubbornness." And she said, "Papa." His throat tightened. "You'd be proud of her. You'd be proud of us." The wind rustled the trees, and for a moment Richard imagined it was Hannah's presence, soft, approving, reassuring. He pressed his forehead to the stone, tears soaking his scarf. "I was so angry, so broken. I didn't know how to love her without losing you. But I see now. She isn't what I lost. She's what you left me to love. And I promise I'll do it with everything I have." He kissed Lily's tiny head, holding her close. "We'll be okay, because you're still with us, through her." As they left, Richard felt something he hadn't in months, peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of hope. Life after that day felt different. He still missed Hannah deeply, but he no longer carried the guilt like an anchor. Instead, he carried her memory like a lantern, guiding him forward. Emily noticed the change too. Richard laughed more easily now, leaned into fatherhood without hesitation. He cancelled late nights at the office, choosing instead to be home in time for Lily's bedtime routine. He read to her from Hannah's favorite storybooks, his voice cracking sometimes, but steady enough to finish. One night, after Lily was asleep, Emily said softly, "You're becoming exactly the father Hannah hoped you'd be." Richard met her gaze, and for the first time he didn't look away. "I couldn't have done it without you," Emily smiled. "You would have. It just would have taken longer." By spring, the apartment no longer felt like a mausoleum. It was alive with baby giggles, colourful toys scattered across the floor, the aroma of coffee and home-cooked meals. Richard discovered he loved the mess, the noise, the unpredictability. He even loved the exhaustion. It was proof of life, of growth, of fatherhood. One evening, as the sun set over the skyline, Richard held Lily at the window. The city sparkled beneath them. He whispered, "You saved me, Lily, you and your mom both. One by leaving me this gift, and one by teaching me how to live again." Emily entered quietly, watching the father and daughter silhouetted against the glowing horizon. A faint smile touched her lips. Richard turned to her, his voice steady but tender. "We're not just surviving anymore. We're living, and for the first time in a long time, he believed it.